Hello and welcome there. Slightly delayed start there, Nicky. I was just getting the stream going on Twitter, but I think we're all good to go now. How are things with you today?
All good, Shane. All good.
Good. We obviously want to talk about the Kilkenny Senior Hurling semi-finals there on this weekend, and they look pretty mouth-watered. But because there's so much happening this week in terms of special congress and all this talk of the Gaelic Football Championship reform, and you're hearing about Proposal A, which would be sort of rezoning a couple of counties to make maybe 4 groups of 8. Take a couple of teams out of Leinster and move them around. Proposal B, which would be moving the provinces to the start of the year, then having sort of a league-based system where the top 5 teams in Division A go through, Division 2 and 3 teams, or 2 teams play off with Division 3 and 4 winners, and that's how they'd work it. So the first thing I want to ask you, in light of being a GAA president, and obviously you would have had a few congresses with you at the top of the table, have you ever seen like a groundswell of opinion or groundswell of support for proposal as we've seen around Proposal B in the last couple of weeks, maybe since 2005 when you had Croke Park being opened up?
There is an element of that, Shane, but I mean, we haven't heard from a number of counties. Now, we're 2 days out from the Congress here at this point in time, and some counties have still to make up their mind. Bear in mind, we don't know how the overseas units are going to vote, although the comments this morning by Larry McCarthy and Tom Ryan may very well influence how overseas delegates vote. Yeah, there has been a level of support for, no question about that, and strong enough support. But it's still not a foregone conclusion that will get over the 60% at the end of the day. My gut feeling is it probably will, but at the same time, there are some doubts because bar down, the rest of Ulster looks like it might be against it. Mayo are going to be against it. And there's a couple of more prominent counties have not come out and said how they're voting either. And then when you throw in all the overseas units, Central Council and all of that, yeah, you wouldn't be 100% sure if it's going to get over the line.
Yeah, it's 60% these days, rather it was 66%, I think, in the past. They only changed that in the last number of years. I mean, when you go into trying to get a proposal through, or let's say you're president there and you don't necessarily want one through, I mean, how blind are you going into these things, or do you generally have a feeling?
Well, this particular Congress is very strange to this extent. The committee that actually brought forward these proposals is no longer in existence. And I'm puzzled. I actually don't know who will propose the motion on Saturday. Now, it's in the name of Ard Corley, so somebody can easily stand up and say, I propose, and another member of Ard Corley said, I'll second, and that gets the proposal, that gets the debate started. But normally what would happen at the start of Congress with a motion like this, the chairperson or somebody else from the committee that has brought forward the proposal and all the workings behind it would make a presentation to Congress delegates about the various aspects of the proposal and what's actually in it. Now, it may very well be that in cases in the past, people had understood what was in it, but just to be sure, the committee would generally make sure they present it's their final opportunity to convince perhaps wavering delegates as to what they're proposing. Now, I've no idea if what's going to happen on Saturday, if indeed anything. So it would be the first time in my memory where a major proposal to deal with championship changes and structures was to take place without some type of presentation at the start. Now, maybe that's planned, but I haven't heard about it. So that is, I suppose, an unusual factor about the Special Congress on Saturday and the primary motion, which is motion 19.
So we hadn't heard much from Larry McCarthy and Ard Stewart or Tom Ryan leading into this, but just from today's media briefing, Larry McCarthy said, I think I would like to see Proposal B implemented. And Ryan added, if you're looking at what you'd like to see the characteristics of a football championship having, 2 of the things to my mind would be teams playing at their own level, and you have a finite number of games, a definite start and end, and teams to get to that same stage of a competition have played the same number of matches, and B does that so for that reason, it's one that I'd like to see. The fact that we haven't heard from them really, they haven't said a whole lot up till now. Like, as a GAA president, and when you're at the top end, do you tend to just wait to hear what way the wind is blowing? Do you sort of feel out the situation before you make that public comment?
Well, I think first of all that the changes, because it's coming through the association, through Congress, I think there is an onus on leadership to make sure that the organisation at large is informed about what's going on. Now, I know there were some provincial presentations, as far as I know, and I think we have to cut them a bit of slack, to be fair, because of the COVID times that we're in at this point in time. But for such a major change in the GAA's playing structures, I suppose I'm a bit surprised that it hasn't been more to the forefront, that there hasn't been more formal presentations. And much of what has been talked about in it has been driven through the media. And I mean, we're all in the media in somewhere or another, some viewed much larger extent than I would be. But nevertheless, a lot of the agenda has been driven through the media. And it's ironic that a number of the people who are on the committee that is now bringing the proposal forward, but the committee itself is defunct, have actually been speaking about it, like Ronan Sheehan and Conor O'Donoghue, just to mention two. I know John Prenti as well. Now, they've been expressing various opinions. So it's been very unusual in terms of a major motion, the way it is coming to be to the floor of Congress, having had a rather strange way of being presented, to be quite honest about it.
Well, what are your thoughts on the portrayal of some of the people who were involved in some of the councils? In some situations, you'd see them being referred to as dinosaurs, which, I mean, maybe some of them have thinking that is stuck in the past, but then it probably is very unfair when you consider the amount of hours that these people are putting into thankless tasks.
It's grossly unfair, because Shane, what has not happened with this discussion as well, when the whole discussion of the football championships and the restructuring, there has been no debate whatsoever parallel with it, which I believe should have happened, and I think some people in the GAA should have demanded this. What is the regional administrative structure of the GAA going to be post this competition implemented? Because you won't have a provincial football championship as we know it in the past. I have no doubt that by putting the provincial football championships at the start of the year, it is not going to have the same level of attraction as it had the traditional football championships, provincial championships, because clearly team managers now, that is going to be their window to try out new players or to try out new formations. So the winning of the provincial championship for some teams will be secondary to preparing for the upcoming league, which is the forerunner of the Sam Maguire Championship. So I think counties will think differently. So what's going to happen to the provincial councils? Because the provincial councils will get the income from the provincial championships. They will get no income directly from the leagues and the knockout championship, and they will be looking towards Croke Park to fill that financial vacuum, if I could call it that, from the proceeds from the league and the championship. So it is, provincial people are concerned because counties look to provinces to help them in the whole area of coaching and games development, which is significant, in the area of club grants, infrastructure grants, and even county infrastructure grants, and various other support mechanisms come through the provincial councils. So I think that their role has not been adequately considered and addressed in all of this. But having said all of that, we have to accept, I would accept anyway, that provincial championships in football have run aground, as it were, that there are clearly issues there that we can see. Yes, Ulster might point that they have a vibrant championship, and to a fair extent they have. But that saying we've all used during COVID, we're all in this together, that has to apply in the context of the GAA and its championships also. So the difficulty with Proposal B, as I see it, while I would be a reluctant supporter or a doubtful supporter, but I would support it, is that there are inherent flaws and unfairnesses in it. But it's the start of the journey, and it will take some time to get the journey to fruition, because it will involve some further changes along the way. But you have to start somewhere. Now, the likes of Martin Brennan would say, with justification, to be fair, in today's Irish Independent, that neither motion should get through, and we should go back to the drawing board. That's not an unfair comment either, and I would have some sympathy towards that view equally.
Yeah, well, I'm kind of on your side in the sense that I do see flaws. For example, a preliminary quarterfinal could end up with the 25th place team involved, but the 6th, 7th, and 8th best teams in the country not involved, based on how that league table would work out. I'd see that a bit problematic, but I like the idea of moving away from what was there. So I think, like you, it's a step in the right direction. If I can just jump back to the provinces, because you talked about how problematic it is that they don't really know their role. Like, you were a Leinster chairman. Do you almost think like our existence is under threat if you're putting on your Leinster GAA chairman hat?
Well, I mean, to an extent, that is the case. But I think parallel with this, there is an onus on Croke Park to have. I think there's an onus to have spelled out the implications of going for Proposal B, or indeed Proposal A for that matter, because there are financial implications. And while many people might think that the talk of money is a bad subject in the context of championships, the reality of it is that every unit of the GAA needs money to survive, particularly national level, where there are people crying out for infrastructure grants to complete GAA grounds and facilities. There are issues around the whole area of employment of coaching, games development personnel and administrators, numerous areas like that. So it is important that money be discussed in it. So I think it was important that the matter be considered. Well, what's going to be the implication for provincial councils if we go for option B? Is there loss of money, if I could use that kind of phraseology? Is that going to be replaced by funding directly from the centre to compensate for that? So that discussion has not taken place, and that's why provincial people are extremely worried. I think it's very wrong to call them dinosaurs. I think there are some very able administrators, but nobody has considered the implications of the type of work that they do post the implementation of this championship without knowing what implication has it for funding transfer from centre to provinces.
Another thing that Tom Ryan pointed out today is that it's not a financial decision. He says it's inconsequential. Just to read out his quote, he goes, "It's not a financial decision. The first thing to look at is the shape you want the championship to look like next year. Whatever hand is dealt with by Congress, we'll make the best that we can. We weren't putting financial numbers to the forefront of the decision-making progress." And he goes on like that. But what I want to ask is, well, number one, your thoughts on that. But number two, there's talk of amendments to Proposal B, just to sort of smooth it over a little bit. But they couldn't happen for the first year. So whatever proposal is there at the moment, that would be what you'd have for the first season of it, and it's only after that first season you could amend it. Is that fair?
Well, no, you possibly. I mean, the Dukes are on Saturday. Could if he wished, if Congress approved, he could accept amendments to Proposal B, which might tweak it in some way. I mean, I haven't heard of anything happen, but I suppose that's always the possibility. But the situation with the finances is that we've seen two sets of finances. We've seen a set of finances prepared by Conor O'Donoghue, who's a financial expert in his own professional private field, and you've seen Jeremy Ryan's figures. Now, look, I'm not going to debate who's right or who's wrong, but I think in fairness to Jeremy Ryan, he was taking a common sense type of view to where this is going. So on one basis, there does not appear to be an awful lot of change in terms of the amount of income that's coming in in its worst scenario. At his best scenario, Conor O'Donoghue was talking about a lot more money coming in. So I'm not making any case one way or the other there, but I think the point to be made here is that the provincial councils need to know, if you're taking away provincial championships from us as they were in the past with a level of income, are we going to get the deficit that's now being created? Are we going to get that back from central funds to be able to run our operation that we did in the past? There's been no comment about that. So that clearly is the issue that needs to be addressed. But we don't know. Shane, we're still in a COVID situation here. And as we speak right now, we've heard various issues being discussed, and there's going to be a lot of stuff opening up on tomorrow in this country here. But what we don't know is what level of attendance we're going to get at our games going forward. Excuse me. I mean, are people going to go back in the numbers that were there in the past? Will they still be concerned about COVID? So we simply don't know what 2022 will actually bring us. We're going into 22 right now on the basis that it's returning to normal service. All gates are open. Anybody who likes can come in. But you don't know how that's going to affect many of our supporters in the older cohort who might still be nervous about going out into that type of environment. So you just don't know. So the issue of attendances at games, there has to be a cautionary view taken of that until we see how things happen over the next couple of months. Because if COVID was to get worse, well, then there could be real fear of people going out to games, and that clearly will impact the income on games.
Is there also a roll of the dice element? So if you've got championship games, especially when it gets to do or die, generally people do show up for those games. But if you know there's like 5, 7, 8, 10, 12 games, there might even be as far as 15 games for teams under Proposal B next year. Is there a chance that people won't go to games as often and maybe might just look for streaming that they'd hope, or maybe county boards can make money out of the streaming? But for the GAA, if people just decide to not go as often, is there a chance that they'll end up like they're already in a financial hole in the sense that they've had to get the government to bail them out to run the last few championships. Is there an element that you could be in serious bother here if people don't really buy into the new structure?
Oh, there's a possibility. I mean, if you get too many games, I mean, people's pockets in terms of their own personal finances can only take them so far. And I mean, it will be up to the GAA to make those games that they're not too expensive to go to. But at the end of the day, as I said, people have only got so much money in their pockets. And there is, I mean, if you're going to have 7 games in the, you're going to have a round robin system in the provincial championships. That's going to be, 3 or 4 games, maybe an average. You could have 7 games in the league. You're up there 10, 11 games. And you'll have a number of games then in either the Sam Maguire or the Tailteann Cup. So, I mean, there could be a lot more travel potential for counties. Some supporters will probably be delighted to see their county so involved. The players will certainly be delighted to be getting more games. But whether the supporters will go there through, as I said, the fear of COVID or the impact on their pocket and other challenges that are out there, given that the cost of fuel and travelling cars and that is increasing all the time, people may become selective about what they go. But the GAA will just have to move on and just hope for the best in that regard and assess it as it takes place.
What do you think? I mean, obviously I haven't mentioned this to you beforehand, but the future of GAA and streaming, do you see that becoming more commonplace? I mean, so many club games are streamed now. Do you see a situation now where the likes of, could this even happen, where Kilkenny GAA decide to stream all their own home league games, for example, or is that something where they don't actually have control over that?
No, when it comes to national competitions, the counties don't have any control over that. That is a matter for Croke Park. And I mean, the question is, will they be able to, through TG Cahir, through RT, or through Virgin Media, who are not in the game yet, are they going to be interested in taking up? Because we're coming onto a new media contract next year. And when that takes place, we don't know who's actually going to be in vogue for it. I mean, you have RT, TG Cahir and Sky at the moment. Virgin Media may come on board. But one thing is certain about the growth in media platforms. I mean, we're talking now to one another on my smartphone here at home in the house, and it just shows you the way that technology is now bringing conversations between the media and other parties to the forefront of for people's interest, and they can watch that live, or they can watch it at a time that suits their own viewing because they might be working. And the same would go for Gaelic games. But it's not a cheap proposition now to be streaming, not inter-county matches, but you take club games and that's not a cheap proposition. It was something many counties entered into because there was nobody able to go to games. But as the attendances are now being allowed to ratchet up to previous numbers, if they're, the grounds can bring in whatever they can hold, I think there's going to be less demand for streaming. And while some people might like streaming to continue, I think there's a cost factor involved here, because the value that you get from the streaming may be outdone by the cost of providing the streaming service, because you will need a link, you will need a commentator, you will need a technical person, you'll need a camera, and you will also need a platform that's able to manage the presentation of the game and also handle the whole area of the funding of taking the payment and making sure it's happening in a way that the funding and the money is secure and all that, and it's done in a way that people who might want to tap into it are not allowed to.
Yeah, absolutely. That'll be one to keep an eye on. Just to talk about the Kilkenny semi-finals this weekend, Ballyhale Shamrocks are going to be up against James Stephens, so that's always got a tasty ring to it. And Tullaroan, having won the intermediate a couple of years ago, they'll be up against the Loughlin Gaels. So I'll just reflect on the scorelines from the quarterfinals. Shamrocks beat Bennett's Bridge 27 points to 115. The Village beat Dixborough 216 to 215. O'Loughlin Gaels saw off Mulnavat 219 to 19 points, and Tullaroan beat Clara after extra time 129 to 219. Just to start off with Ballyhale against the Village, where do you think Ballyhale are in relation to winning those All-Irelands a couple of years ago and even this time last year?
Well, look, they didn't take. By the way, we should just get this right, because they would take exceptions to this. They're now called Shamrocks Ballyhale, so we better get that right, Shane. We fall into that trap as well, I should add, by the way. Look, at the start of the year, they didn't overly stretch themselves in the early rounds of the league portion to get into the championship, and they were satisfied enough to come into the quarterfinals rather than get into the first round, rather than get straight into the quarterfinals by the league section. Now, they have been playing their game so far this year without Adrian Mullen, and Darren Mullen was only back the last day. So, but they're certainly getting back to the type of form that won them those club championships. They're playing very well. Now, they're playing James Stephens on Sunday, and James Stephens, in my view, would have beaten them last year had James Stephens brought on Owen Larkin. I think they would have. I think the game was crying out for an Owen Larkin and his experience. Now, as it happens, he came on as a sub for James Stephens in their Shield final against Mullinavat recently. I was at the game, so at least he's in their plans for the championship on Sunday. He won't be a starter. Ironically, who's not in their plans is Jackie Tyrrell, and I saw him playing with their second team last Sunday, and he gave an exhibition at centre half back. So maybe there'll be a phone call to Jackie between now and the weekend. But James Stephens will go into Sunday's game, and I spoke to their manager Seamus O'Dwyer last Sunday. They will be full of confidence. James Stephens will always feel they have a chance against Shamrocks Ballyhale. They don't feel overawed by the occasion. And I actually give them a good chance. I think they're in with a right good chance of winning it. They may have only won their semi-final or their quarter-final by the skin of their teeth with what was really a goal scored by a corner back who came down the field, Shane O'Donoghue, and put it into the back of the net, and Dixborough had no time to recover. But nevertheless, there was little between the two teams in that game, to be quite honest about it. But James Stephens will go into Sunday's game not in any way overawed by the occasion and feeling they're in with a very good chance. I give them a really good chance on Sunday.
And like James Stephens have rejigged their team in the last couple of years. I would have thought Luke Scanlon an inside forward, Niall Brazel half forward, maybe inside forward as well. But are they centre back in midfield these days?
Yeah, but probably as well, bear in mind that James Stephens have played all their matches this year without a lot of the championship matches and even the league matches without Conor Brown. Now, he managed to get a little bit of game time the last day, so he hasn't much game time behind him. So whether he starts or not, I don't know. But I think a significant development for James Stephens as well is the appearance at number 3 of one Diarmuid Cody. Now, Diarmuid Cody is the son of Brian Cody. Now, he wasn't around last year. He was injured. And I think that one of the highlights of Sunday's game is the potential clash between Diarmuid Cody and Colin Fennelly, or Diarmuid Cody and TJ Reid. I think that's going to be one to watch out for on Sunday. He's actually playing very well, and he's a big asset. He's a big, strong player, and I think he solidifies that full back line a fair bit. And I think that's going to be an intriguing battle between Cody and TJ Reid, Colin Fennelly, or whoever Owen Cody, whoever goes in. I think that's going to be one to watch out for. But Niall Brazel, who you mentioned there a moment ago, he's now the centre back on the James Stephens team and playing extremely well. Now, where they would play Conor Brown if he's to start or if he's come on, I'm not sure. But if he wasn't to start, he'd be one hell of a sub to bring on.
And would Diarmuid Cody be a chip off the old block? Does he play similarly to how his father did?
Yeah, there'll be some development in his play, and that's nothing wrong with that in the nicest possible way. But he's a player who goes straight for the ball. He's a hard tackler and he's a good defender. His presence at the edge of the square for James Stephens this year has been very successful, and he's been playing very, very well. And he was rested in the league final, in the Shield final, and so he's had an extra week's rest as well to fit any niggly injuries, because he has had injuries in the past.
Yeah, I believe the likes of Matthew Root is still playing well. Owen Gilfoyle scored 5 from frees the last day. But I'm hearing a lot of good things about Cian Kenny. He's an exciting talent.
Well, I understand he's been brought on to the Kilkenny panel. He was on the extended panel last year, and he's now in the full panel, which is fair enough. He played very well in the game against the semi-final. They were up against Dixborough. He scored. What did he get? I have it here in front of me. He scored 6 points. 5 from play. So he was in good form now. He's a type of player that's low to the ground, and he's a hard worker, and he's quite an elusive player, and will need a fair bit of marking. So, look, he's going to be up against whoever. It could be Dara Corcoran, who's a Kilkenny senior panelist now, Richie Reid, you don't know. There's a lot, Joey Holden, well, he'll be in full back, of course. There's a fair bit of experience in that Shamrocks Ballyhale defence as well. So Cian Kenny will certainly have to work hard to. Any score he'll get will be hard earned.
Yeah, do you think there was any sense with Shamrocks in their first game out with Bennett's Bridge in the group stage, when they were miles behind, and then didn't they score 6 goals in the last quarter of the game? That was a sort of a reminder that, okay, these lads, they're slow starters and they'll get going.
Yeah, I was actually listening to that game on my way down to Limerick. We were covering Camogie All Ireland final evening, and I actually went in to get a cup of coffee in the place. And when I actually came out, I discovered Shamrocks had scored all these goals. So I had to ring back into one of the lads in the studio to see what was going on. Look, it was phenomenal stuff. I think at the end of the day, it was as much of a reflection maybe on Bennettsbridge as well, who realised they had serious defensive problems. And while they did get them sorted, it was still, even though they won the match, it was still a big blow to them. And the Shamrocks in winning that game, in getting so close in that game, in many ways it felt like a victory, because they weren't putting all their eggs in one basket. They weren't hell-bent on getting first or second in the group. They were happy to get further down the line and come into the first round and take their chances then, because they have confidence in their squad to when it comes to the knockout games that they would do it. But that was a phenomenal game. But certainly when they met back again, Bennettsbridge got 1 goal. They got 115, but Shamrocks got no goal, but they got 27 points, which would have been a lot of matches.
Couple of comments in here. Damien Mason, watching live from Ulaanbaatar in Mongolia. That's not one you'd expect, is it? Hopefully you're still there. I'll read out a couple of the other comments, Nicky. It just seems to dropped for a second. Joe Butler says, the Village won't beat the Shamrocks if they hit as many wides as they did against Mulnavat in the Shield final. Shamrocks will score about 30 points between goals and points. And he adds, Shamrock's defence has tightened up in the last couple of games. I lost you there for a second, Nicky, but yeah, there can't be too many watching from Mongolia.
No, look, they're not, but obviously Damien is obviously on some journey over there, and hopefully he's keeping well. That is the main thing, and certainly he's keeping in touch with what's happening at home through the medium of online services like this and local stations and that. Look, I take the point there from the other caller there, Joe Butler, as well. I mean, he certainly feels that the Shamrocks have the capacity to get a high number of points, even if they won't get a lot of goals. But I do think there's a very decent defence there in James Stephens as well. I just feel that this is a game James Stephens could win. Shamrocks, in most people's eyes, will be favourites. But I think James Stephens have a very decent chance here. I think they've been getting close. I think there's a good character in that particular team, and I think the players realise that it's getting to the stage now where those players have to, now is the time to deliver if they're going to deliver anything. But clearly getting over the obstacle that is Shamrocks Ballyhale is the biggest you can get in club hurling right now.
So Tullaroan against O'Loughlin Gaels the next day out. It's some journey from Tullaroan since a couple of years ago, when you know that Tommy Walsh post-match interview after the victory over Thomastown, when he was so ecstatic.
Well, if you knew Tullaroan people, probably passionate they are, how steeped in history the club that have come through. They play with a passion. I mean, I've seen their games. They beat Erin's Own in the first round. They won that game in a 10-minute spell in the second quarter, where they simply blitzed Erin's Own. Now, Cormac came back and got a couple of scores at the end, and perhaps the Tullaroan defence was a bit blinded by the sun. But they won that game and won it well. Now, against Clara in the quarterfinal, to be honest about it, I think if Conor O'Shea had pointed a late free for Clara from about 50 metres out and put it over the bar, which it was scoreable, I'm not sure we'd be talking about Tullaroan. But once they got the opportunity to go to extra time, I mean, the Pádraig, Shane and Tommy Welsh, they put on a performance in extra time. Among others, John Walton as well, when he moved into the full forward line. But Pádraig Walsh was just poetry in motion during that game, and he drifted out of the centre half-back position, maybe went more attacking from a midfield role. And they're getting good now when Pádraig goes forward, and somebody's able to drop back into the defensive pocket there to make sure it's not a big gap left there. But he's had to pop points over from every angle. Now, he's playing a team that has shown immense improvement over the last couple of weeks. And this has been a great journey for Tullaroan. But the one thing about Tullaroan is they won't die soft, but they are meeting a better team in O'Loughlin Gaels than they have met all year.
Have O'Loughlin's changed that much in the last few years? Like when I played them in challenge matches in more recent times, I thought they had a lot of smaller, skillful players, but maybe enough of the ball winners that they maybe had before when the likes of Gertrude was playing.
Well, yeah, they have course change. I mean, if you take the two cornerbacks, David Fogarty and Mikey Butler are young players. They're only in 21 years of age. In fact, Mikey Butler would have actually captained the Kilkenny under-20s last year, except he got a bad cruciate injury the previous year against against Dicksboro, and that knocked him out. But both David Fogarty and Mikey Butler would be very young. But they have, I mean, the big thing they've done this year, and the question is, will Kilkenny follow? I mean, Paddy Deegan has been converted into a forward, And I mean, for a number of games early on, we all had grave doubts. Was this a funny move by Andy Comfort? Andy is the manager of the team this year. But in the last 2 matches, he's been very influential in not just scoring himself, but in engineering scores from some of the other players. Because in Owen O'Shea, who is a member of the Kilkenny extended panel, he's a big, strong physical player. He's pretty good as well. But there are plenty of other players. I mean, Mark Berrigan has been extremely consistent for a long period of time. Got a couple of runs with Kilkenny. And a young lad called Owen Wall, who actually was, for a number of years, was playing soccer with Waterford. And it appeared as if he was going to go that route. He's been back playing hurling now for a year or two, and he's a very elusive corner forward. Has actually some of the same style of play as Keane Kenny for James Stephens in terms of stature and the style of play. So they have good players, and Andy Comfort has actually got them performing very well in their last couple of matches. Now they defeated Mullinavat 2-19 to 19 points in the quarter final, but in many ways Mullinavat had set themselves up really here because they had beaten them earlier in the league section. And that would have been maybe seen as a little bit of a surprise. So in many respects, to try and do the same thing twice was maybe expecting too much of Mullinavat. But O'Loughlin Gales would be favourites against Tullaroan. But I think we would all say in Kilkenny, you ignore Tullaroan at your peril because they have just this great tradition. And it's amazing the way tradition goes on from generation to generation, the way they actually play and they approach themselves. The Phoenix of Kilkenny, the famous Johnson Club, or something similar as well. They probably have been one of the favourites to be considered for relegation in the Intermediate Championship. They're now into the semi-final because they're winning matches, because they don't know when to give up, and they have converted JJ Delaney into a forward, and he scored 1-2 last Saturday.
Yeah, that's incredible. I was just looking at the semi-final lineup. Thomastown, who were managed by Henry Shefflin against Glenmore, and then Fenians with JJ against St. Lactans. I mean, it makes it very interesting.
Well, Thomastown would be the hot favourites here. I mean, Henry Shefflin has got them to play a style of hurling that maybe was a little alien to them, but they had the capacity because they had physique and size. They have trained better than they've ever trained before. There's been a level of discipline about their approach. So, I mean, Henry knew what he was taking on here. This is a team that failed at the county final in the last 2 years, when both days against Tullaroan 2 years ago and against Lisdowney last year, they probably should have won on both occasions. But he's brought a different mindset to the team. It's broadly the same players, more or less, but a very different mindset and attitude. But they won't necessarily walk it away against Glenmore, who are playing very well. Owen Murphy, the county goalie, playing very well at centre-back. And young Ian Burden, who was an under-20 player this year, really playing well for Glenmore, as is Ger Aylward, who has gone from the Kilkenny panel now. And in a way, that takes a certain amount of pressure off them. But throw in Alan Murphy and Shane Murphy as well. That's not a done deal. The other semi-final, St. Lactans, were 6 points down with 15 minutes to go last Sunday against Carrickshock and won it in the end. And they defeated the Fenians in their normal league match a number of weeks ago. So they'll be favourites going into that. A strong last 10 minutes from the likes of James Mark got them over the line, but it didn't look for a long time as if they were going to make it. Fenians then beat St. Martin's, but the Fenians they're never beaten until they're tugged out in the Tome in Johnstown.
And what is there anyone that's kind of stood out to you for a Kilkenny call-up? And I know off the top of your head it might be difficult. You mentioned that Keane Kenny is now on the panel proper, but is there anyone there who's putting their hand up to Brian Cody?
Now you're going to laugh at this, Shane, because obviously, as you know, I'm involved with the community station, and we'll be asking some of the lads in the same sort of questions. This is probably going to be the funniest part of this interview, but there's a guy playing for Shamrocks Ballyhale called Brian Cody, who's been playing very well. And there's a fella playing for St. Martin's at intermediate level called Brian Cody, who's playing very well. So you could possibly, Brian Cody, I think, was on the Shamrocks version, was on the extended panel. So there's every possibility, there's probably good reason why you could have two Brian Codys on the playing side and one Brian Cody managing the team for Kilkenny next year. Now, wouldn't that be a commentator or a media person's worst nightmare?
Yeah, you'd love doing the live updates for the Kilkenny Community Radio then, wouldn't you?
Yeah, but those two guys are playing very well. And I also think that I mean he was actually the goalie on the Kilkenny minor team not so long ago, but Aidan Tallis of Lisdowney scored 3-4 last Saturday in their relegation semi-final against Lisdowney. So look at players like that who are popping in scores. Inevitably their name will pop up. perhaps be members of an extended panel, come in and see how they get on, and Brian has a chance to maybe give them game time in some of the pre-season challenge games or whatever it might be. You just don't know, because Kilkenny will have to find a couple of new faces, and why not some of these guys?
So, like, it looks like Davy Fitz is going to be put forward for ratification in Galway. Now, whether it goes through or not is another thing. But what do you think that gives Galway next year? Because it's probably the first time he's taken over a team that are expected to be winning things. Like, there's no reason that they wouldn't fancy beating or winning Leinster next year, for example.
Well, it's ironic that he moved from Wexford, where some of his greatest games were when patrolling the sideline with Brian Cody a couple of yards away from in the other dugout. He'll be now doing the same if everything turns out as we're hearing from Galway. Look, I know Davy. I had a long chat with him and a long communication with him when he actually gave up the Wexford job. And there's a lot of me have a great time for Davy. He's passionate about it. Now, he goes maybe over the top at times, but I love the character that's there. I think he comes out with enormous passion. I think in going to Wexford, there was hope and possibilities that they wanted to do and win in All-Ireland. They got a Leinster, all right. I think Galway is different. There is real expectations that there's enough quality in Galway to be winning in All-Ireland. And right now, they might be seen as the second best team to Limerick in many people's eyes. But that question mark is there because they have faltered somewhat over the last year or two. It'll be an interesting appointment. It may not be the most popular appointment with some people in Galway. I mean, Jeffrey Linsky was probably lining up for some extent, but it didn't go well for him with some of the under-20s. Brian Hanley's been doing a brilliant job with the minors, and maybe he's not quite ready to go to seniors, and maybe neither of them wanted the role. I don't know the details. But it seems strange that there is nobody within the ranks of Galway Hurling to step up to the plate themselves. I suppose Matty Kenny was an option, but he seems quite content where he is. But look, Davy is Davy. He will, if he can get into the headset of the players that's there, yes, there will need to be some changes because Galway can't come back with just the same set of players again. But God knows we've seen so many good underage players, minors and under 20s, 21s, that they need to come forward now. And we just need to stop this conversation about Galway have so many great teams over the year underage and can't do senior. They have to come up now and get back to where they were under Micheál Donoghue, who I thought might have gone back, but you know, he has his reasons, and I had a good chat with him one day in Croke Park. We were covering games, and I wouldn't say what we talked about on air here, but he's a genuine guy, and I feel that he certainly he certainly was a big loss to Galway, and a guy I'd love to see him back in the helm again, because I think he's a man really knows his hurling, gets the best out of players, has their respect. But if Davy goes in, look, it's going to be great for the game, and that I like Davy, as I said, and I love the passion he brings to it. And when Kilkenny play Galway, if Davy is at the helm again, sure, God, it's going to be great on the sideline with himself and Brian Cody. Sure, isn't it a dream for people involved covering games?
Oh, you can be sure of it. So Butler's Hurley's here says, Nicky, a fantastic hurling man doing great work with community radio in Kilkenny, a man who's done everything in GAA. And Damien Mason, who we talked about earlier in Mongolia. I last met Nicky in Newry, February 2020 at the Club All-Ireland semi-final. Great hurling man and a gentleman. I'm starting to wonder, is he related to the Shamrocks goalkeeper, Dean Mason?
Well, I expect it's one of that clan, all right. Yeah. That was a great game. I tell you one thing. They were very, very lucky that day to get out with that victory over Slaughtneil. I was covering that match, actually. Slaughtneil were, look at it, just typical Shamrocks. They just are able to, they're in a spot, they're in a corner, but they somehow are able to get out of it. And that's the greatness of the players and the greatness of the club over so many years. But that was one day where they got out by the skin of their teeth, and Slaughtneil will never know how close they were to getting one of the biggest scalps in club hurling.
Yeah, without doubt. Actually, just because Colin Bonner was operating in Kilkenny there for a couple of years, I wonder what your thoughts are on his appointment with Tipperary and how you think that might go.
Well, he was actually operating with Dixborough inside up to 3 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago, when he left to go take on the Tipperary job. Now, he was with Pádraig Fanning on the Dixborough as mentors, and Tony Brown actually came in and took his place when Colin went to Tipperary. Look, Colin is a very experienced guy, and in a way, Tipperary we're in a tricky enough position. I mean, Liam Callett understandably decided to stay with Waterford, and I can understand that. I know they worked very hard to keep him there, and Liam felt maybe a sense of duty, and maybe things have been tweaked in such a way that come next year, some of the changes that he wanted are going to be in place. You had Darry Egan going down to Wexford. Now that was going to Wexford itself was not the big deal from my perspective, but to drive from Puckane in Tipperary, and you know that territory better than me, Shane, down to Ferns at the training centre or to Wexford Park, it's a hell of a tough old journey now. The roads are not they're not motorways, let's put it that way. You know, and then you had the Tipperary man in charge of Darren Gleeson in charge of Antrim. So you had three really, really good quality coaches who had opted out of the county. So, I mean, the county board would always like Kilkenny would stick inside for their coach. And in Colin Bonner, they have somebody who has a lot of experience working with players and a lot of young players on the Tipperary squad as well. And bear in mind, Colin has experience of working with young players down in WIT in Waterford. So he knows how to deal with the challenges faced by young players around their academic life and various things like that. So I think it's a good move. He's brought in I know he brought in Paul Curran and I can't remember who
Johnny
else
Enright and Tommy Dunn is retained.
Johnny, yeah. And Tommy, yeah. So look, they're all guys who are very knowledgeable hurling men, knowledgeable on the coaching side, and they will bring the best out of Tipperary. Look, Tipperary is not in a bad position at all. I mean, they're good young hurlers. They'll now need to be given their head a little bit more, and some of these opportunities will arise because you'll need to tweak it and shape it up a little bit. But when you're coming to looking at the championship honours in 2022, Tipperary is a county that will certainly figure very prominently in people's views.
One final topic I wanted to touch on before I let you go, you've been very good with your time, is the malaise we're seeing in recent times that have involved spectators. So off the top of my head, there was one at Laois there recently. There was obviously that high-profile one in Wicklow. And then even at the weekend, there was one in Derry. Now, I don't think that was quite as bad as what I saw in the other two, but nonetheless, involving spectators and players. I mean, just even from, if you're up at the top of the association, this isn't something new. But what do you try and do about this?
I think the disappointing thing, Shane, here is that the GAA has put an awful lot of energy into its respect initiative. You would have heard it as a journalist. You've been given press releases on an ongoing basis. You've seen campaigns conducted. You've seen referees with the word respect on their jersey in Croke Park and around the country. That's why it is so annoying. But the bottom line is that what makes it worse in many respects is a number of these incidents, and I didn't see them all that you're referring to, actually happened at underage games. I mean, that's probably worse than at adult games. It's bad at any games. It's as simple as this, Shane. It gets down to leadership at county board and tackling the problems there and expelling teams from championships, expelling them even for that. If they're playing minor, maybe they're not allowed to play minor the following year. Or certainly they're not allowed to play any games whatsoever on their home patch. They have to play at a neutral venue. It needs to be something that is going to stick. There's no point in finding clubs €100, €200, €500. That doesn't do anything for me. I think that end of it doesn't work. You simply have to penalise clubs. And yes, people will say, but you're penalising the young lads and that's not fair on them. Or you're penalising the lads going to be playing minor next year and that's not fair on them. Yeah, but responsibility has to be taken by the adults that have perpetrated these problems that are in the clubs. And until we face up to it, and unfortunately, we have national airwaves then jumping on the bandwagon on talk shows where they wouldn't cover anything about the GAA normally, but they're happy to cover this sort of stuff. Now, you might say, well, why wouldn't they? And fair enough. But at the end of the day, there is thousands and thousands of matches played every year where there is no problem going on. But there is an issue there, and I'm not for 1 minute denying it, but this calls for leadership in counties. There is enough in the GAA rulebook to deal with this. It's now up to the people running the affairs in each county to do what they were elected to do and punish those who are causing this very unsavory sort of stuff to appear on our and you know this, we're broadcasting this, as I said earlier, over an iPhone. The bottom line is now, Shane, is with technology today, what happens in a field in anywhere where that chap at the Masons is out in Mongolia, he can film stuff on his iPhone now and have it back to anybody here in Kilkenny in a couple of seconds. That's the way life has gone now. So if there's hassle in a GAA field, it just is. It's everybody has a view of it now because it's up on Twitter, and then the world knows what's after happening.
Yeah, absolutely. Nicky, you've been absolutely brilliant with your time. Really, really appreciate it, and we'll chat again soon.
As always, a pleasure talking, Shane. We'll chat soon.